So welcome all to our Sunday morning Bible study. Welcome guests. This is we're going through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we are doing a little bit different, a different take. We've harmonized them together and we're presenting the Gospels in chronological order. And for this 9:30 Bible study, if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you want clarification on something, you're welcome to raise your hand and speak. We just ask that you wait for the microphone to get to you so that those who are streaming it and watching online, like my mother in San Diego, that she can hear your questions and hear your comments. So, all right, so before we get going, if you have a Bible with you, or if you don't, there should be one in front of you. And if there's not one in front of you and you need a Bible, just raise your hand and we'll get you one. But open your Bibles to the book of Malachi, chapter 4. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit, specifically verses 5 and 6. So open your book, Malachi chapter 4, and just mark that spot. Last week we finished with the genealogies and getting through the two different genealogies of Jesus. And then we started into what I kind of call the prequel, which is the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist. And Zechariah, if we remember, Zechariah was a priest. And the Bible specifies that he was a righteous priest. His wife was also a descendant of Aaron. So both of them were descendants of Aaron, which I didn't bring it up when we talked about the genealogies, but that's just kind of one more clue, one more puzzle piece. It's not a definite 100%, but that's another piece that maybe those genealogies, that none of them were Mary's genealogies. And I'm not going to go back into the whole genealogies debate and discussion, but Mary and Elizabeth are cousins. Elizabeth, we know, comes through the line of Aaron. So does that mean Mary also came through Aaron? Possibly, we don't know, because it could have been through her mother's side as well. But it's just one more little piece on those genealogies to think about and ponder. But both Zechariah and Elizabeth are righteous. And we talked about what we know about the priesthood back then and how the priesthood was very corrupted. And that's kind of why we did that 12-week foundational groundwork study that we did, is because, you know, most of my life I grew up reading this and I just read over those lines that Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous people. If you were reading it back then, if you were Matthew's audience, when you saw priest, you would have automatically in your mind associated corruption. So that's why Matthew was making that specification that they were not corrupt, they were righteous.
I think you mean Luke.
Yeah, Luke, I'm sorry. But yeah, so that's why we did that background, just so we kind of have that base understanding. All right, so one week Zechariah was in the inner chamber of the temple. He was doing his priestly duties, and he was burning incense. And the incense was burned twice a day, in the morning and the evening, and it was burned during the prayer time, the morning prayer and the evening prayer. And that incense burning, it represented the prayers of the people going up to God. So he's in that inner chamber, and he gets startled when he notices something is there. And there should not have been anybody in that inner chamber. And we talked also about the dimensions of that inner chamber, and the door just to get in there was 30 feet high, and I think it was 15 feet wide. So this was not a door that you could just open up and sneak on in. It took I think like about 10 to 12 to 15 priests to open up those doors to get in there. So he's startled when he notices that somebody is in front of him who should not be there. And then he's scared when he realizes that this is an angelic being. This is a heavenly being that's in front of him. And the angelic being tells him that his prayers have been heard, and that your wife is going to have a son, and that you are to name your son John. And this son of yours will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord. So that's implying that many of the sons of Israel have left the Lord. They've turned away from the Lord. But then the angel goes on to tell him some even more good news, and that is where we pick up today. So in verse 17, and by the way I've kind of plan on doing the study moving forward is we're going to be breaking it up into these little kind of chunks of stories that are being told. And my plan is to read the entire story first, just so we have that big picture of it. And then we're going to go back and go kind of verse by verse, line by line through it. So that's what I found, I think, is the best way. But if you have a different way, if this flow, if this pace, if it's not working for you, please let me know. If you think that I can do the formatting better, let me know. This is my first time ever teaching in this way, so I'm all ears. You don't have to let me know now, just send me an email or come see me afterwards. So, but anyways, going on with verse 17. The angel says, "It is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." So this angel is quoting Malachi. And now we can turn to Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. This says, "Behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with complete destruction." So the theme of the book of Malachi, and whenever we see the Old Testament being quoted in the New Testament, we want to go back and understand that entire quote and understand the context of that entire quote. So the whole theme of Malachi is a call for repentance. It's calling the Israelite people to repent and reform, and it ends with judgment is coming. The great and terrible day of the Lord. What does that mean? Great and terrible day of the Lord. That, in my brain, doesn't really compute. Well, what it's saying is that it is going to be a very terrible day when the Lord judges you. So you want to make sure that you are not one of those people getting judged by the Lord. So the angel has just told Zechariah, whose child will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord, that his child is going to be the forerunner, this like Elijah, this in the spirit of Elijah, to get the people ready because judgment is coming. That's what this angel is telling Zechariah. And Zechariah, who was a priest and a righteous priest, he would have been very familiar with this passage in Micah, or Malachi. He would have completely understood Malachi. By the way, does anybody know what is unique about Malachi, specifically this chapter and verse? What is different about this? This is the last two verses of the last book of the last chapter of the Old Testament. So when you think about it, this is where the Old Testament ends. Here in Malachi, chapter 4, 5, and 6, the last verses of the Old Testament. And now we have the beginning of the New Testament, and it's like God is picking up right where he left off. He ends right here, and here he is bringing it back right here, and he's just picking up where we left off. So here we have this angel quoting scripture to Zechariah, and what's Zechariah's response? He still doubts. And he says in verse 18, Zechariah said to the angel, "How will I know this for certain? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years." Does this story sound at all familiar? Have we heard this story in the Bible someplace? An old barren couple being told that they're going to have a baby? Yeah, this is a lot like Abraham and Sarah. So what do you think Gabriel the angel thought when Zechariah asks him this question? And as we're going to see, Zechariah doesn't answer the question. He gives a response, but he doesn't answer the question. Because what do you think Gabriel's answer might have been had he answered the way Gabriel had wanted to? What would my response be if I had been asked that question? It'd be like, "Oh, I don't know, Zechariah. How do you know your prayers have been answered? Maybe it's because you're standing here burning incense, which offers the prayers up to God to be heard. Maybe that's how you can know, but what do I know? I'm just an angel. You're the priest." But Gabriel doesn't give him an answer. In verse 19, Gabriel says, "The angel answered and said, I am Gabriel who stands in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news." So all Gabriel does is responds with his credentials and the authorization that he has to speak. And there's a lesson here, because sometimes it's best not to answer a question. Sometimes it's best to just leave it, because sarcasm, like I probably would have wanted to answer, is usually not the best answer to questions. Where else do we know? Oh, also, I think the reason he didn't answer that question is because that question's already been answered. It was answered with Abraham and it was answered with Sarah. So that's how Zechariah should know. Now, where else do we know Gabriel from? Have we heard of Gabriel anywhere else in the Bible? He was in Daniel. Gabriel is the same angel that spoke to Daniel when Daniel was having his visions. And Daniel was forecasting this future Messiah coming. So here's now Gabriel talking to Zechariah. And Zechariah would have known instantly. He would have made that connection between Daniel and Gabriel. Then in verse 20.
Andy?
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
So we read that and it seems kind of disjointed from the question. But when we think about it in terms of Gabriel establishing his authority, he says, well, you can believe it because I'm Gabriel who stands in the presence of God. And if that isn't good enough for you, then something's, wrong with your faith. And so it seems like such a fundamental statement, but it's like somebody, enforcing the law saying, well, I'm doing this by virtue of the law of the United States of America or whatever, that if you care about that, you're going to be, okay, that's sufficient.
Yeah, you don't need any more authority. And not only is he establishing that authority that I stand in the presence of God, but he's telling him, I was sent.
Yes.
I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. You should be receiving this with joy, not with skepticism, not with doubt. Because we've already answered the question of how can two old people who are barren have children. That was answered 2,000 years before.
And when you bring up the parallel between Abraham and Sarah and Zechariah and Elizabeth, there's also in one sense that John the prophet was also going to be in his outreach with the message, he was going to be father of many nations, if you will, through the Gospels reaching to the various nations of the world.
Yeah, that's very true. And all of Judea did come out to see John and hear what he had to say. So great point. Thank you. Okay, so verse 20. And behold, you shall be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their proper time. So Zechariah basically becomes mute. He was not able to say what happened to him. He was not able to speak about what's going on. And this is a very important concept to just kind of file away in our brains, because this is going to come up in a little bit. And then I noticed, I always kind of glossed over this until I started really looking at these passages. Verse 23, when the days of his priestly service were ended, he went back home. When the days of his priestly service are ended, they allow him to go back home. The guy walks into the inner chamber, a normal individual, he comes out and he can't speak, yet they still make him finish his 1 week of duty. No sick days for him, no paid time off for this priest. Nope, it's like you don't need to speak to burn incense. You can keep finishing your week and working. So I don't know, I laughed when I read that. All right, so that's the announcement of the upcoming birth of John the Baptist. Moving on now to the announcement. Well, actually, no, we're going to continue. Verse 24, after these days, Elizabeth, his wife, became pregnant, and she kept herself in seclusion for 5 months, saying, this is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked up with favor upon me to take away my disgrace among men. So, why did Elizabeth remain in seclusion for 5 months? Why would she do that? What would people say if she were to announce to the world that this old barren woman had become pregnant? Would they even believe her? I'm guessing probably not. So, and Zechariah can't tell what was going on. He can't say what happened. So maybe she wanted to wait until she was beginning to show before she kind of comes out in the population again. Maybe she didn't even believe that she was pregnant, because again, her husband can't talk to her. Her husband can't tell her what's going on. Maybe she also did it as kind of a sort of a bed rest to protect her baby. Even back then, they would have known that the older you are when you get pregnant, the more difficulty some of those pregnancies can be. So for whatever reason, though, she waited in seclusion for 5 months. And the Bible, ultimately, it doesn't say. It just kind of leaves it for our speculation. All right. Now we move on to Mary being told of her conception. It says, now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the descendants of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. So, what is a first century betrothal? I think most of us here understand what a 21st century engagement and wedding is all about. But what do we know about first century engagements and weddings and betrothals? So let's talk about those. All right, so back at that time, people primarily lived in large family units. You didn't just live with your parents when you were growing up. You lived, and often in the same house, as your parents, as your aunts, as your uncles, as your cousins, as your grandparents, and your great-grandparents. And it was not uncommon back then to have aunts and uncles who were of your age or even younger than you back then. So you grew up with your extended family. And the women in those families, the women really were the ones that ruled the roost in those families. They are the ones that kept the children in order. Now the man, the husband, was the head of that family. He was the provider for that family. He was a teacher. But it was the women in those families that typically kind of ruled. And it was the women who kept those kids in line, especially as those kids got older. And young boys and young girls were not allowed to be together. They were very much segregated. You were allowed to kind of be with your siblings, with your direct brothers and sisters, but you were not allowed to go on a date. We have a comment over here. You were not allowed to go mix with other people. And in these, especially the little towns like Nazareth with Little and Bethlehem, a lot of the times you may only have one or two or a handful of family units in these towns. Go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to back up I'm interested in Zechariah not being able to speak. Mm-hmm. He was a priest.
Is your microphone on?
Says it is.
Okay.
It says 3.
There we go.
He was a priest, so he may have been able to write and read.
Yes.
But his wife, probably not. So if he
they
can't...
did have an education back then. The children they were educated, including the girls, so she may have been able to write and read. Mm-hmm. I think the issue was how available was writing material. They didn't just have paper and pen.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They didn't have notebooks laying around like we do and pens, and so It was a big deal to have to write something. So what he was able to tell her or explain to her through fingers, I don't know, would have been very interesting to see how in the world he conveyed what was going on.
Yeah, and I guess he could have just like written on the dust or the dirt to her at some point and kind of tried to explain a little bit. There is, and we'll get to it later on, there is maybe some evidence, and some people think that he was also deaf, that he was totally mute, that he couldn't speak and he couldn't hear, because when John the Baptist is born, they're like making signs and symbols to him. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, great observation on Mike's part. We know that Zacharias could write.
Yeah.
Because when they were saying, how they were going to name the boy, John wrote, I think in the dirt, but he wrote, it says, his name is John. So we know that he could write. And, if there was something important and that he had to communicate with his wife, he's just going to grab another priest or another friend and write the message. And one more point that he made, but it eludes me. So we know he could read.
Yeah.
And on the dumb part, it looks to me like when they're talking about naming John, that he could hear them. He couldn't reply. I know they're making the hand sign, but it looks to me like he hears them and he writes down his name is John. So I'm going to guess that he could.
I tend to agree. I agree with that. And the Bible doesn't. The Bible only. It specifies that he could not speak. It doesn't say anything about not hearing. So, but I know there are people that theorize that and that he was both couldn't speak and couldn't hear. So, great points. Thank you. Okay, where were we? Young men, young women, not allowed out of the oversight of their family. So because of this, back then, out-of-wedlock births were very, very, very rare. As I said, small villages, often only a few families. And so how would you find yourself a spouse if you're living in this tiny village and you're basically surrounded by your relatives? How do you get yourself a spouse? And you're not allowed to talk to other boys. So even if you go to the festivals that they went to every year, even if you go and you see a cute boy over there or you see a pretty girl, you're not allowed to go talk to them. You're not allowed to go be anywhere near them. Well, it was your family who found your spouse for you. It was your family, because who knows you better and who knows who would be compatible for you better than your family, those people that raised you. They weren't going to leave an important... Did you have a question, Florento? Yeah, did you have a question?
Can we go back
Let's
on...
wait for the microphone. Back to Zechariah.
Can we go back on verse 25, please? Andy.
Yeah.
It says, "This is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace among men." That was Elizabeth talking disdainfully about himself. Why is that? The only thing that the Bible described Elizabeth was that he was a woman who can't have any child, that she was barren. Mm-hmm. But yet she talked about herself with disdain. Why would that be?
So being barren, that disgrace that she had, being barren back then, not being able to have a child, was a huge, it was a disgrace. It was an embarrassment. And people often looked at you your job, your primary job as a wife was to give your husband a male son. That was your main job. And so she can't do that. And in fact, that was actually grounds for divorce. Zechariah could have legally and appropriately divorced his wife and found one who could give him a child, but he didn't, because both of them were righteous. So they were both following God's plan. And I think she's acknowledging that as they were younger, in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, they would have been praying for a child. God, please give us a son, give us a son. Eventually, they probably gave up on those prayers, realized that it wasn't in their cards for them, it wasn't part of their story. But yet, here's God coming back saying, I've heard your prayers. I heard your prayers back when you were praying all those years, and I'm going to give you that son, and I'm going to take away that social disgrace that you have and that you feel right now because you don't have a son. Mike? It was nice of you two to sit next to each other so Kimball doesn't have to run.
So it's an enigma, really, why this would be a disgrace, because you have two of the most, more than two of the most prominent women, Sarah and Rebecca both had challenges bearing children.
Yeah.
So you think there would have been maybe a measure more compassion, but when life met the street, there was talk amongst women and some men, no doubt, that, this woman hadn't borne any children for her husband, he must really be disappointed in her, or some other kind of derogatory reflection. And yet, what we do see this is that she had faith that God was going to fulfill what he had promised, because she says, he looked upon me, he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace. So this is an expression of her gratitude and her sincere praise to God.
And of course she would have had gratitude because she was a righteous woman. And as we talked about it last week, every time society would have mentioned, oh, that's Elizabeth, that's the wife of Zechariah, the barren wife.
Right.
I mean, hearing that, it would have cut like a knife to her. That's how they're looking at her. So, Lee has a comment.
One of the common beliefs of that time was that almost anything like this was a result of sin.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Either we have here this young lady who has been out sinning in some way, or her parents sinned, and therefore she's being punished in this way. You look upon this, she's not only barren, but she's sinful some way. Something is wrong with her spiritually.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's a big reason for disgrace. And we can see this goes clear back to the book of Job.
Yeah.
That was the common belief at that time. It's the common belief at Christ's time, that anything that goes wrong with you is a result of sin. God is punishing you for some sin you or your parents perhaps have done.
I would say even to some extent it goes on in today's time, because how often do we hear people saying, why do bad things happen to good people? It's like we expect bad things to happen to bad people because they are bad. So yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing it up. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Go ahead. Now we are making them run back and forth.
Good exercise. Not me.
No. Teresa, yeah.
Sorry. And it's a shame that they always blame the woman, because now with science the way that it is, it could have been the man that was
It very well
infertile,
could
not
have
the
been
woman. But
his.
the woman always took the blame.
Yeah. And that's because back then, and you're right, they didn't understand the science, but back then the primary role of a woman, of a wife, was to be a baby factory for the guys, for their husbands, to make specifically male babies. Yeah. So, anything else? All right. Moving back forward again. Where were we? Families. Families are the ones who would find the husband or find the spouses for their children. And sometimes these arrangements were made when children were pretty young. I mean, even like 8, 9, 10 years of age. Families would get together and say, you know what, I think your daughter and my son would be a good match. Let's get them engaged. They wouldn't be married at that point. It would just be kind of like maybe an unofficial engagement. And children did have some say, so they could say, no, I don't want to marry that, I don't want to marry that girl. The girl may say, that guy's a dork, look at him, I'm not going to marry him, I'm not going to be his wife. So they did have the right to say yes or no in this. But during that initial, if the families had made these arrangements, during that initial years, and they could break it off with pretty much no repercussion. But eventually they become what is called betrothed. And here we go. The betrothal happened pretty young in people's lives. Usually the girls were about anywhere between 14 and 15 was the typical age, but sometimes down even as low as 13. That's when they would get married. Boys were usually a year or two older. So Mary, when this is going on, she was very likely 13, 14, maybe 15 years old, but probably in that 13 to 14 year age bracket, which kind of sounds weird for us in our culture. But marriages were usually, as I said, they're not from the same village. They're not from that immediate area, because in your immediate area, especially in these smaller communities that Nazareth was and Bethlehem, there was just slim pickings. There just wasn't many options there. So, what happens around that time? Your child's in that 13-year, 14-year age bracket. The father of the groom would make an official deal with the father of the bride. And oftentimes the groom would pay what we would call a bride price. They would give property, money, maybe livestock, whatever, for the price of this bride. Now, this was not considered to be buying the bride. They were not purchasing this woman for their son. What it was compensation to the family for the loss of the labor that this daughter would provide for the family, as well as it was just to ensure, to show proof that we have the ability to continue with your daughter's social and economic standard that she's used to and that she's accustomed to. And it was also to strengthen family ties and just to kind of form those family bonds. But it was not considered purchasing. This was not an ownership deal. There was no title being handed over. So they would make an agreement, and then once that deal was set, And once the bride and the groom agreed to this deal, they would meet. They would all meet. And that groom, he would pour a cup of wine. And the groom would hold it out, and he would say, "This is a cup of a new covenant, a covenant that I make with you today. I will not drink of this cup again until I drink it anew in my Father's house." Now, does that sound familiar to anybody? Absolutely, we've heard that. And we are going to hear, as we go along, we are going to see that there is a lot of wedding speak and a lot of wedding language in the gospel messages, in the gospel story. So he would hold it up, he would make this, and this covenant, it's basically, a covenant means a solemn agreement. So this groom is making a promise to this young girl. He is and it's not just a promise, but it's a promise that it kind of has legal implications with it as well, legal and social implications and standing. The term anew means in a new way, in a different way, typically in a new, more positive way. So after saying that, the groom then holds out this cup to his bride. And if she accepts it, and if she drinks from it, then that is her way of accepting to and agreeing to this betrothal, this engagement. So this is similar to a guy today getting down on one knee and holding out a diamond ring, and if that girl accepts that diamond ring and takes it and puts it on her finger, she is agreeing to his engagement proposal. If she instead pushes this cup away, then she is refusing. Now this did not happen very often, the refusal. Very rare, and it would have been a huge social, a social faux pas for a woman to do this, because all this stuff was kind of planned out ahead of time. But they could do that. But the refusal was really, the time for the refusal was in the planning stage, not the proposing stage. And once they do this, once he holds out the cup, once she drinks from it, they are now officially betrothed. So at some time, at some point, Joseph and his family went to Mary and her family after Joseph's father and Mary's father made this agreement that our children will get married. Joseph held out that cup to Mary. He made that statement to her. Mary took that cup and she drank from the wine, and now they are betrothed. Yeah, go ahead, wait for the mic.
The statement, if the bride drink from the cup, she has accepted the proposal. At this time, they are betrothed.
Correct. She accepts their betrothed.
The sentence is devoid of emotion. There is no love exists between the two. What do you think of that as an evangelist? Does it work in the modern time? Would that work in the modern time? It is guided by the elders of their family. And some people would make a comment and say, yeah, that's the best way on how to get married, because they're guided by their own family. And if they're Christians, more than likely the chance of having a good marriage would work out. Do you believe in that?
Do I believe if this system would work in today's society, in today's culture, and would we do better with having families arrange marriages? You know, I haven't thought about it. To be honest, I have not really put any thought into it. I did not use this system when I married Christine. My family had nothing to do with it. I asked her father for permission, but it was all the two of us meeting up together, and so yeah, and so far it's worked out 26 years. So I don't know. That's the correct answer. Is I don't know if this is a system that would work today. If you had families of very devoted Christian families with devoted Christian children, I don't know. Maybe it would work. I think there's a lot more to marriage than just emotion, and we're kind of going down. Mike has a comment there. We're kind of going down a rabbit hole I wasn't planning on going down into, but yeah, I haven't really put any thought into it. Go ahead, Mike. Mike, you're just itching to say something.
So I have 4 Korean couples that I'm friends with, and that all had arranged marriages, probably before they left Korea, but 3 of them are still doing really well. They have great marriages. One didn't do well, but I'm just saying that in America it doesn't happen, but there still are cultures that where the parents choose the bride and the groom, and they do have a say, but it can and does work, even though I'm glad I got to choose my own because I got the best.
That's what I tell Christine, that she got the best, so. Yeah, there are, you're right, there are cultures today that still do that arranged marriages, and I don't know what the results are. I think your success to your marriage is much more about the attitudes that both of you have towards making it happen and making it work, because that whole puppy love initial infatuation is gonna definitely wear off. So yeah, your attitude is much, that's more important than anything else. So anyways, but this is going down a rabbit hole I wasn't planning on going down. So, all right, so as I said, at one point, Joseph would have held out this cup to Mary, and Mary, who was probably around 13 or 14 years of age, she would have accepted that cup, and now they are engaged. What happens right after this? Well, and when that betrothal, that's now like a legal betrothal. They are now technically legally married. And we'll get in a little bit what happens if they decide to break that off. But after this, the groom leaves. The mother or the wife or the girl stays with her family, and the groom leaves, and he returns to his father, and he goes to his father's house. And what the groom starts to do is he starts to build a room onto his parents' house. He's going to build the room that's going to become their house when they officially have their wedding ceremony. And this is now the betrothal period. And how long does this period last? It lasts until the father of the groom says it's now time for my son to get married. So the groom, he doesn't know. The bride, she doesn't know when the wedding date is going to be. And oftentimes, even the groom's father doesn't know when the wedding date is going to be. And so it's during this time that Mary's story starts. So the groom goes home, and he's building this house, he's building this room onto his father's house, and they virtually have no contact with each other, the bride and the groom. They're technically legally married, but they have no contact with each other. They're not seeing each other, they're not talking with each other, they're not going out for dinner, they have no contact. And oftentimes, they weren't even in the same village or the same region. Maybe they had brief conversations at the festivals, maybe they were allowed to see each other briefly, but they were not allowed to be alone with each other at all during this period. So the groom is back at his father's house, and the father is going to help the groom build this room on the house as much or as little as the father feels is necessary. So whatever lessons that the father wants his son to get from building this house, he's going to make sure that his son gets. The groom may finish this room, and he may say, "Dad, I am all done with this room." And the dad may look at it, and the dad may say, "My son still needs to learn lessons on patience and humility." So the father may say, "It's not right, tear the whole thing down and rebuild it. Except this time, do it right." And if the son says, "What's wrong with it? What did I do wrong?" Dad might say, "You figure it out. That's for you to know." And now he has to tear it down, and he has to start rebuilding it completely. At some point, the father may decide, "You know what? We're halfway done, but I think my son's ready." And he may jump in and say, "Come on, son, let's finish this up together, and let's go off and get you married." And that might speed up the process. But whatever time or whatever it is, it's the father who determines when they are going to get married. And the bride's responsibility during this is to be prepared, is to be ready for that day when the families show up and said, "The wedding is now going to happen." And they would get very little notice. There might be some communication. The father might be able to communicate to the bride's father that, "Yeah, my son is still kind of a dork. He's got a long ways to go. You don't have to be ready anytime soon." Or he might put a message out, like maybe during the festivals when they see the families. "Yeah, we're getting close. My son's about ready, so start making those prep." But often there was not a whole lot of advance notice that this wedding was going to happen. So that bride's responsibility was to be ready. So when we hear the parable that Jesus spoke of the 5 bridesmaids and how they were waiting for the groom and how some of them weren't ready, it's kind of hard for us to understand that. But those first century Jewish audience, they for sure would have understand the context of that parable that Jesus was giving. So at some point, the father says, let's go, let's get you married. And they go to the bride, and they go to the family and said, we are here. And at that point, the wedding would start. And the bride would be whisked away and gotten ready. It would start with a ceremonial bath, a mikvah. She would be bathed. And then they would take her and they would make her beautiful, just like what we do today for our weddings. They would do her hair up, they would put her makeup on, they would put perfume, they would do her nails, all that stuff. They would get her ready for her big wedding day and they would make her beautiful. And this is what they would do. They would basically consider her to be consecrated for this wedding. The informal meeting of consecration is devoted exclusively for a particular purpose. So they are consecrating her for her wedding day. Then they would blow the shofar. The shofar was that ram's horn. They would blow the ram's horn, and that would signal the start of this ceremony. After that, this young couple, they would gather under the huppah, and that was a prayer shawl. And they would hold this prayer shawl up with poles, kind of a canopy is what that was. And that was to symbolize God's presence hovering over this young couple as they were saying their wedding, what we would call wedding vows. After that, they would have the ketubah, and that would define what their marriage is going to be to each other. And they would recite anywhere from 7 to 10 to 12 lines or so. And these were things that would define their relationship. It outlined the husband's obligations to his wife and his wife's obligations to her husband. After this was done, that's when the marriage was consummated. Now, this is where the story gets a little bit weird and a little bit creepy. So, they would go into a room and they would consummate the marriage, and I'm just going to leave it at that because I want to leave this very family friendly. And what we would call the best man would stand outside in front of this door to this room, and he would listen. And once the marriage was consummated, once that consummation was finished, the best man would announce it, and that would start a huge multi-day party. So, again, a little bit creepy to us. But John the Baptist in John chapter 3, he used this wedding language when he said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the groom, but the friend of the groom who stands and listens to him rejoices greatly because of the groom's voice. So this joy of mine has been made full. Well, that's the language that's all about the consummation of the wedding. And then once they finish their big multi-day party, basically the bride and the groom, they get a year off together. They're going to go back to the groom's house, back to that room that he made on his parents' house, and they get a year off. The groom is not allowed to go to war for a year. He really doesn't have to work a whole lot. He'd probably help out some during the harvest season and during the most busiest times, but for the most part, they don't work a whole lot, and they are given a year to just kind of be together and get to know each other. Because if you remember, there was no time during this whole process. Even that betrothal, they were kept apart. So now is when they finally get to know each other. And as I said, we're going to see a lot of this wedding talk throughout the scriptures. John 14, my Father's house has many rooms. Mark 13, the day or the hour nobody knows, only the Father knows. Mark 14, at the Last Supper. Again, this is the cup of the new covenant. Jesus kind of gives that same toast during the Last Supper. Jesus refers to his church as his bride all throughout the Bible, all throughout the Gospels. So lots of wedding language, lots of wedding symbolism, and a study of the Old Testament, we would also see that whole wedding symbolism, that wedding language. All right, so that is a first century betrothal. Any questions on that? We're kind of running down to the end of our lesson. Go ahead, Mike. Where's Kimball? Over.
So we need to stay focused on the purpose for which the gospel writers included this information. And I think the things you brought out were very informative, but we need to, of course, stay focused on the fact that this was all about the fact that Mary conceived without the agency of a man involved.
Yeah.
In it. So that Jesus' son, her son, would not, be under the shadow of Adam's sin because he was not descended from Adam.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna get into that because we're gonna look at this whole story now.
Right.
I just kind of wanted to put that background in, and it's this whole study of the gospel started out with several years ago. It was during Christmas, and I was just thinking, because I love apologetics and I love finding the evidence and the archaeological proof of what the Bible says. And I was just wondering if there was any extra biblical sources that could verify this birth of Jesus story. If there was anything out there, not that I was expecting much. I wasn't looking to find an OBGYN exam on Mary that would show that she was a virgin. But I started digging into it, and I did learn quite a bit. And then it kind of led from I wanted to give a presentation just on this part to now we're doing the whole thing. But once I understood more about that first century culture, because it's hard for us to believe, and I think it was hard on even back then for the people to believe that Mary was a virgin, but I think it's harder for us because in our society it's so much more rare, and for somebody to say, oh, I'm pregnant, but I'm a virgin, yeah, right. But when you look at the society back then, it's you could still maybe make the case that she was with a different man, and I think that's what Joseph was thinking, but it certainly wasn't Joseph the father, because culturally that just would not have happened. They were not close, and I think we'll be able to make the case later on that they were not close to each other. They were 100 miles apart throughout this whole betrothal period. So thank you. Any other questions? Got Paul in the back.
I just wanted to point out that this was the arranged marriage. First of all, we kind of just skip over the fact that this young lady is 13 to 15 years old. If you're the dad, how much arrangement do you want to have in this situation? I know I've had kids in their 20s, and I just wish that I could arrange it.
Yeah.
But
So are you a vote for Florento's idea that we should have more arrangement?
Yeah, absolutely. Beginning with the answer no. But the dowry was you have to realize that they're giving their daughter over to this young man. Maybe, that extends into the other men in that family, that whatever they say in business, in the economy of the family, she's going to be subject to it. So it's an arrangement that guarantees that if he turns out to be a real doofus, and he's just out there and he's drinking and carrying on and all, and paint your own picture, she has a security. That's her social security, and it makes them be real serious about what they're doing. So yeah, that would be my observation in that.
Yeah, and I live in, because even though the groom is going to build that room onto his father's house, it's not going to necessarily be their forever home, because one of his brothers is eventually going to also get married and need to have a room on his father's house, but they would still be living in that whole family compound with all of their family. So it's a little bit harder, I think, not that it didn't happen, but for somebody to kind of go off and become a doofus and start not acting as he should be. You had your whole family there that would have kind of kept you in line when you were doing that. But
yeah, one other point to point out the ethics of the world compared to the people of God was that in Roman marriage ceremonies, they actually would tell the bride, now you realize he's a man, he's going to go down to the cat house, he's going to have affairs, and you just have to put up with it because that's what a man is.
Yeah, that's just part of your life and your role, yeah. Anything else before we close? All right, well, with that, we are done for the day. We will see you next week, and we will continue with the story of Mary. Thank you.